people who have been students with me before, you will have learned how to do grids, but it's always a good thing to go through it once again. And of course, many people, in fact, I think most people on the video have not been a student of mine, and so you'll learn from this. Now, if you watch my portrait video, I do go into making a grid there, but I don't go into it in great detail, so that's why I wanted to do this video. And I've also seen many people coming, sending through portraits that they've drawn, and many of you could benefit from using a grid, or when we get towards the latter half of today's video, I'll show you a shortcut so that you don't have to use a whole grid, but it is important to understand the principle of the grid before you go to the shortcut. And so those shortcuts will help you enormously, particularly for portraits, but they help you for drawing anything and getting the right proportion. So if you're using a still life, whatever. I will also say that these grids are only useful for drawing from photographs. You cannot use grids for drawing from life. And actually, I might post on this page, there's a beautiful etching of a draftsman called Albrecht Dürer. You may have heard of him, and he has set up a grid in front of him to look at something through the grid. And the biggest problem with that is that your eye needs to be in exactly the same spot every single time. And if you move your head just slightly, then the view in the grid doesn't work. So that's the reason why we don't use a grid in front of us when we're drawing from life. But the practice of using them on photographs will get you into the correct sense for looking for those proportions when you are drawing from life. And when we get to that shortcut, then you will be able to use similar techniques for finding proportions when you are drawing from life. So, should we get started? We have got 14 people there. Hello, Denise, welcome. I can see there's a Denise and Jasminka. Good morning in Europe, there you go. And a Heidi, and we've got Heather watching from the park, so she must be enjoying this beautiful sun and watching with her little dog. So that's fantastic. So I am going to switch over to, I was hoping to be able to see your comments on my tablet, which I've got there, because I don't always see them on my screen, but I am going to swap now to that. So you can still see me, and of course you can see what I'm demonstrating. Okay, grids. So what a grid is, in case you don't know what a grid is, and I'm just going to take my photograph out of this grid before you see it. That pretty much is a grid, and you can see that I have drawn it on a document sleeve. So these are the things you buy from a stationery shop to put your documents in, and it's very useful because you can just slip photographs in there and you can use this grid over and over again. Now, I do know that some people like to take a photograph or print out a photograph and actually draw the grid on the photograph. Of course you can do that, but I find it easier to just use this document sleeve. Now, the other thing you can use, this is called Acetate, and it's a cover from a document that I received, I think, from my accountant. It's also known as overhead projection film, but I don't think anyone uses overhead projections anymore. So you can see it's this thick piece of plastic, and that is suitable as well. So if you put your photograph underneath that, You will probably need some tape. Oh dear, I did get some tape to bring here, and I haven't seen where it is. Okay, I must have forgotten to bring it to the table. So my little dog is looking for me. She wants to come sit on my lap. She's been very, very clingy lately. Anyway, so getting back to this. So if you put that underneath your acetate, it's not going to stay there. So it's a very good idea to tape that on the back. But if you are using the plastic document sleeve, then that's fine, because you can just put your photograph into that pocket. Okay, so that's what we're going to be making. And I'm going to show you a technique that makes your life very, very much easier. So I have a clear pocket to start off with. And there are actually two methods. One method I will tell you about, but I don't actually have any graph paper with me. But graph paper does make your life a lot easier. So if you want to get some graph paper from a newsagent, or if you have some, all you need to do on your graph paper is to rule up some lines that are about 2.5 centimeters, something like that. I think this is 2.5 centimeters wide. Let's have a measure. So the size of your squares, yeah, this is nearly 3 centimeters actually. So the size of the squares that you put on your document sleeve will depend on how big your photograph is. So you will need quite a big photograph, an A4 photograph. Even if putting this one in here, if I put this photograph in there, see if you can see that, then I've split it into 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's probably quite good. I wouldn't, if you have a photograph that's smaller, then you might only get 6 squares, in which case you need to make these squares a bit smaller. Don't worry about that technicality. 2.5 centimeters or 3 centimeters is the way to go. So if you've got graph paper, you can simply rule on your graph paper and put that inside and rule up your lines in the same way that I'm going to show you now. Okay, so many people, when they rule up graph paper, they will measure, and on their page as well, we're going to use the same technique. They will measure the 3 centimeters and then put little marks all the way down. The technique that I'm going to show you means that you don't need to do all of those measurements and then all of those measurements. I find that I'm not accurate enough when I do those measurements, and we do want these squares to be exact squares because we are going to enlarge them for our work, or at least make them the same size. Now, a couple of things about the pens that the pen that you need to use to make your grid. First of all, this is just one of my graphic pens. Even though it says water and fade proof and it's pigment ink, these do not write very well. You probably can't see that. It's kind of bubbling up. They do not write on plastic. So what you actually need is a pen that writes anywhere. So there are a number of different ones, but you need one with quite a fine nib. So this is a Bic permanent marker, but I have found there's a pen in Australia. It's called the Stay Anywhere permanent pen. I do know also in newsagents you can find pens that you can write on CD discs and that sort of thing. Those are permanent as well, and they've usually got a nice fine point. So you will find that when you write, I'm just going to write in the middle on the end of a square. If you write with this pen, then that's permanent, and that's what you want for this grid. Okay, so the next thing you need is a ruler, and depending on how many squares you want, reasonably, you can use big or small rulers. This is pretty much a standard ruler, so any standard ruler that you have will work beautifully. This is the one that I measured the 3 centimeters on. And in fact, if I put it over this grid, what I used to draw this grid was actually wider than this ruler. I will use this grid, and I think what I used was this piece of cardboard. No, it wasn't even that piece of cardboard. So if you want to make yourself a ruler without measurements on, but as long as they are parallel, you can cut your cardboard to whatever size you want. And we are going to be using this thicker cardboard when we transfer from the grid onto our paper. So I'm going to use a ruler, and I'm going to show you how to do that. And it's fairly simple. I'm going to place my ruler on the plastic at the bottom of the document sleeve. Just looking to see if that's in your picture. There you go. Now, you might notice that there's no, you can't really notice. There's a tiny bit at the end there, and the reason why I've left that is because that's the inside of the pocket is the join, which is slightly above that edge. So I'm simply going to draw a line across the ruler. Now, I'm not going to do the whole thing today because you're going to get bored watching me draw all these lines. But you can see that we have got perfectly parallel lines as long as you line your ruler up correctly and you draw with this pen that stays anywhere so it doesn't come off. Okay, so I've got 1, 2, 3 rows there. As I said before, this one is smaller than my previous grid. That's okay. Then, once you've done all of the rows up there, we're going to do the columns or rows in another direction. Now, I was putting it there. Yeah, that'll do. Because you're using the same ruler, then the width between the lines is going to be the same no matter whether it's a column or a row. Just checking who's come in. Hello, Annika and Heidi and Brenda and Deb. Welcome from the Strand in Western Cape. Lovely to see you all. Okay, so what you can see there is that I've ended up with squares that are exactly equal in size. They are squares, so the definition of a square is that one side, all sides are equal. And because you're using the same ruler to mark this, you are going to get squares. There's not much more that needs to be said about that. I will just say that the reason you use a nice thin marker is because we need to be able to see through these lines or see through the squares what we are going to draw, and the thicker your marker, the more it will obscure. So if I just transfer over to this thicker marker now, hello Rita, hello Gillian, welcome to join us. Please ask me any questions, type your comments in the questions and I will endeavor to answer them. If you're making a comment about something I've said, please say so specifically, because I see your comments about 15 seconds after I've made my comment. Okay, so I've just used a different marker now, and you can see that it is thicker than the previous one, so it may obscure, but not by much. We're talking millimeters, so I don't think it's a massive problem. So don't stress if you can't find a very thin one. So try and get a permanent marker with the thinnest point that you can. Black is pretty useful. because you can see it, obviously. Okay, please excuse me. Have a drink with me. We have a Susan. Hello, Susan. Welcome to the video. And guess what? I remembered to charge my batteries on my lights, so you can actually see my face and what I'm drawing below here for a change. Okay, so many times people have got this grid and then they say, well, what now? And how do we use that grid to transfer what we need onto the paper? And I'm going to introduce you to my late dad. I did a portrait of him using this lovely photograph, which was taken on his 80th birthday. He passed away 7 years ago now. He was an artist, and he is sorely missed, but perhaps he's watching me do these videos. And I'm going to show you how to use this grid with my dad. Okay, but I've gone a step too far, and I'm going to show you how to transfer or how to put the grid on your paper so that you can use it. And there are a number of issues that come up with that, which I will talk you through. Now, you can see that this document sleeve, or perhaps you can't, but I'll tell you that this is an A4 size. So we know that A4 is pretty standard these days. And so document sleeves that you buy are usually this size, if not bigger. The book that I have here, you can't see the whole thing, but the book that I have here is A3, which is twice document size. And I am going to enlarge the picture onto my A3. Now, of course, you can do the same size as your grid, which is fantastic. If you're doing it the same size as your grid, then you use exactly the same ruler, and you use the same technique as we did with the pen marks, but you draw soft lines. Okay, I will tell you, give you some information about rubbing those out and all sorts of things, but in the meantime you need to grid up your page. Now, I'm not going to do it with this ruler because I want to actually enlarge my photograph. So if you want to enlarge, you need to have a ruler that is wider than these squares. And they also need to be squares because the proportion of a square is the same no matter what size it is. And that was one of the reasons why I cut up this, this piece of board. I also could, this is a big ruler that actually used to belong to my dad, and you can see it's a big hefty ruler that I didn't want to use because of how heavy it is, and you can see that I've actually cut my board the same size as that. So it is possible to find rulers that are bigger, and you can just use this ruler. This is quite a nice one because it already has a corner. My camera has just turned off. I have a suspicion that my batteries have run out. Can you let me know? Hello, Jane. Can you let me know if you can still hear me? Please. I just don't want you to have lost me completely. We have 18 people on the call, and I will change to my other camera. So I did forget something. I forgot to charge my big camera. Okay, you can still hear me, I'm hoping, and you can still see me down here. Yes, we can see, but not. Okay, great. You can hear me and see the paper. Thank you very much. Okay, I will continue here and not to worry about not being able to see me. So I'm going to take my big ruler and I'm going to mark up my page. So I'm just pushing that up so that you can see the bottom of it. Now, when you mark up your page, you need to draw very softly. I've got a 2B pencil, which is quite a strong one. Maybe I'll cross over to an HB pencil, which is a bit lighter. Can you see that I'm holding it just halfway across? That means I can just go lighter like that. And you can see a very soft line on the page there, and it is exactly the same technique as before. Okay, I'm going to rub out that little mark in the middle of the page. That was my mark of how much you could see on the screen. Now you can hardly see those marks because they're so faint. I want them faint so that I can rub them out more easily later. Now at the beginning of this video I mentioned the Sky TV UK program called Portrait Artist of the Week, or Portrait Artist of the Year is actually their program, and many of them will use grids as well. Okay, you need to be a bit patient with me as I do this, because I'm going to show you how to transfer into this grid, so I do need to have most of it done, unlike the plastic. Okay, what is most important about this is that you need the same number of squares on your page as you have on your grid. Now, what that means is the grid that's going to cover the photograph you're looking at. If you've got a small photograph in that big pocket that I showed you, then you only need as many squares that are covering the photograph. So I'll show you what I mean by that. So with my dad's photograph, he pretty much covers the whole, fills the whole A4 page. So I need all of the squares. However, if I just use this photograph as before, and I put that photograph in the bottom corner there, here I would only need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows. Just see if you can see that. And 1, 2, 3, 4 columns. So you don't have to put all the squares that you've got on on your document sleeve. That's the word I meant to say. Okay, so let's see if I have enough. I might have misjudged this, in which case I'll have to put another photograph in there, because I didn't think to count how many pictures there were, and I can't even find my backup photograph. Yes, I can find my backup photograph. Okay, so here I've got, so that's a good lesson for you. Don't do what I do. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 columns, but here I've only got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so that tells me I made my squares too big here if I wanted to enlarge it here, or don't use such a large picture. So we probably are going to have to, your plastic net is done, Jasminka says. Thanks, Jasminka. So we won't be able to use my father's printout after all, because I haven't got enough place on this page because I've made my squares too big. So even if we just cut that off where below his chin, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We could fit him in that way, but not that way if I wanted to complete the photograph. But I might have a fix. Let's see what happens. Can I make him a bit smaller? See, he just fits in that line there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How about that? So can you see what I did? I turned him so that the excess of the picture is filling that column there, and his head just fits in the corner there. Now, I did have some tape to bring ready to tape this up, but I must have left it somewhere. But I'm going to show you the theory. If you've got some masking tape, you can stick your masking tape on your plastic there around your figure so that you know where it is that you're looking. And the reason you do that, and in fact I'm going to use, this is a whiteboard marker. Now, a whiteboard marker is not very good for making your permanent marks for that grid, but it is quite useful. Are we going to be able to see the red? No, not very well. I will have to go back to the black. It is quite useful if you want to number your columns and number your rows. So I know we're getting quite technical here, but you will see that it will help us a bit later. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that means I'm starting on that row. Maybe I should rub that out. Can you see why we're using a whiteboard marker now? Because the permanent marker didn't come off, but my pen, my overhead one did. And for our rows, I can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But I think that was too many. Didn't I say it was too many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. No, it's just enough. Okay, so that will help you. Now, what helps you most on your own paper, you have to have the same number of squares as there. So if you have put masking tape around, so that's the frame we're looking at. Yep, you can see that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Rub out. Now, obviously, mine fits perfectly. If yours fits smaller and you don't need all of those, then you need to rub out the areas that you're not using. Okay. The reason we are using this grid is to transfer one square at a time, because we are not used to listening to what our eyes see, paying attention to what our eyes see, and drawing has us paying attention to what your head sees. Your head doesn't see, of course, what your head thinks it knows about things. This helps you to not draw what your head wants you to draw, and that's very familiar territory when you're trying to draw a portrait. Now, the biggest problem with this is that you can't see my photograph and my drawing if I put them side by side, but I think this will be fine. The reason why these are numbered is so that we can transfer them to the correct square. And in fact, I could use the side here Now I know that you can't see all the squares, but you can see enough to make it useful for you. I'm going to drop down right to the top there so that you can see. Okay, one of the pitfalls that I was talking about in my email is that you need to draw accurately even with the ruler. Can you see that that square there is much narrower than that square? So at some time I must have gone a bit crooked. But I am going to still follow what these say. So there's not much happening on that top row. Certainly nothing in that square. A tiny bit in this square. And it joins up there. And then it joins up there. And then there's nothing in that square. Okay? And then in this square, which is down here, I can see, can you see that little corner there? So I am looking at where these lines are relative to these squares. And when you do this process, we are not trying to get every single detail. We're not trying to minutely get every single hair down or every single wrinkle or anything like that. We are getting the main proportions down to help you. That's all. So don't overly worry about it. But you can do things like this bit of hair crosses that square over there, right near the end there. It's about, I don't know, a fifth of the way across. And it crosses over here, right at the top of the square. At the bottom, this crosses over, if I use my, looking for my overhead markers. Are we at 3:30 already? Goodness, I didn't think I was going to take that long. My apologies, but we won't be taking too much longer. So if I look at where his hair crosses over on this line here, you need to estimate where that is, and that's about a quarter. If I divide that line up into quarters, his hair crosses over that line about a quarter of the way through. Now the reason I've done that is because on this square here, I want to know where must I put his hair crossing over. And if I divide this square up into quarters, now you don't have to do this for every single square. I am demonstrating the principle on this first square so that that will help you as you go around doing the whole thing. So I'm going to go, yes, his hair crosses over there, and it joins up like that. Here I can see that it is nearly touching that square and then coming in a little bit. So it continues to go out, nearly touches the edge and comes in a bit. And I'm drawing with an HB pencil with my hand held halfway through so that I'm drawing very, very lightly, okay? And this is how you go square by square, drawing it. It is better, in my opinion, to go square by square across like that rather than to start with the eyes. Now, many people I know have started with the eyes and they've counted down, okay, it's going to be in row number 5 and it's 1, 2, it's the third step across, so the eyes are going to be there. It's actually the second step across. See how I made that mistake? Well, it's very easy to make those mistakes. So I prefer to go line by line by line. Having said that I prefer to go line by line, I want to show you how I transfer the eyes, because obviously that is something you want to be able to do when you're drawing portraits. So I am actually going to do what I said I was going to do. Don't get confused that this, where I've drawn number 5, is the middle of your I've lost my train of thought. Don't get confused that this is your first column here. This is actually the first column here where his ear is. Hello, Mickey. Nice to have you joining me. My brother is here all the way from South Africa joining me online. That's fantastic. Okay, so I've just said that I'm going to use column 5. That means his ear is going to be here, and it goes across just over halfway, it crosses over there, and can you see that it doesn't quite go down to that line there? And his face crosses a bit there. And so his ear does something like that, in that square there. Okay? So the reason I've come here is not for you to jump to it. The reason I've come here is so that I can just show you how I do eyes. Because the size of the eyes in your portrait is one of your most important features to put on the face. And everything else is has a proportion according to those eyes. And if I look at this eye, I hope you can still see what I can see good. It is right at the top of that corner there, and that corner is row 5, and it's the row right next to where I drew the ears. Moving that a bit away, and I can see that the eye finishes just over halfway, and if I put a line underneath it there, I can see that the depth of it, so that much, that's probably 1/4 of the box. And the crease of his his tear duct goes about there. So his eye is actually really, really tiny, the opening of his eyelids, right? And in fact, the opening of his eyelid finishes there, even though the tear duct goes there. So those tiny little areas are important to pay attention to. Okay, so then I'm going to miss the next, let's fold that over. I'm not going to completely miss this, but I can see that this eye does cross this line. And this brings me to another important reason for your grids, and it is the connection between how to use these grids and how to use something similar to a grid when you're out in the open. I want you to observe how that line above his eyes on our grid is straight across. So I have put it there straight across so that you can see on the grid line. Yes, Jasminka, it is fantastic to use a grid, and you will get used to the grid. And as I said, the shortcut is coming up. So the pencil going across his eyes, can you see that his eyes are not at the same angle as that pencil? This is where we go wrong in portraits so many times. If I now put this white ruler across his eyes, can you see that is the angle of his eyes? So it is crucial when you are drawing these portraits to get all of these angles correct. And I promise you that your head is going to tell you to draw those eyes straight. But because I can now compare that angle, so I've gone from the outside of one eye to the outside of the next eye, that is at an angle to our straight line across. Very important. Okay, so what that means is you can use your pencil vertically. I know you can't see that vertically because it's pointing at the camera, so I'll just hold it like that. When you're out in the open or you're drawing from real life, if you hold your pencil horizontally across somebody's head, if they're sitting for you, or doesn't matter what you are comparing it to, you can hold your pencil horizontally in front of you and you can see whether something else is at an angle or not. The same can be said for vertical. So if I look at the side of his ear, I can see this ear is parallel to that line. So it's pretty straight up and down. It's a tiny bit wider here there, but not really by much. Okay, but if I look at this ear, you can absolutely see that the angle of that ear goes like that, and the straight line does that. So this is where I wanted to show you how you can use the idea of a grid in real life, because you can hold your pencil up when you're looking at something and you can put it straight against their ear like that. You can see visually I've put it straight against my dad's ear, and you can see that the ear is going away from that pencil. So really very useful to be able to use your pencil like that. I wish I had a camera facing me. I might have to go to my computer camera in a second, but I'm sure that you can see what I mean. And this is where using your pencil as your horizontal or your vertical is extremely helpful. So pencils get used in lots of different ways, and not only drawing. We can use them as a straight edge, horizontal or vertical, to see how things are going in what we're looking at, regardless of what we're looking at. So that is your shortcut to using a grid style in real life. A second thing to know about grids and how we can use our vertical pencil or horizontal pencil is to find out where things are relative to something else. So if I put my pencil over my dad's face like that, you can see I have put it at the side of his eye, and I can see that his mouth is, the end of his mouth is lining up almost exactly, nearly with where that pencil is. So if you drop a line down like that, you can see where this is relative to that. Okay, and I can see that he's turning his head, because if I put my pencil straight up on his nose, I can see that's crossing the middle of his eye on that side. But if I put it up against the pencil on that side of his face, it's crossing right to the side of his eye. So that's your second technique, taken from the information of a grid, to use your vertical pencil or your horizontal pencil. Okay, so one is to check angles, the angle of the ear against that pencil. The other is to drop a line down to say what else, where is his eye relative to his mouth? Where's the end of his nose relative to the eye? Where's the end of the eye relative to this side of his mouth? Well, that's not very helpful. If I put it at the end of his mouth, that crosses that portion of the eye. So you can do that horizontally as well. I can see how low is this ear according to his face, and it's chops off the top of his nose. See, look how much nose there is underneath that ear, but that ear is above. So using your pencil horizontally or vertically to emulate the lines of your grid are extremely important. I do it all the time. Now I'm being asked a question. Have you ever done the grid method on a tablet or computer? I'm new to this method. Do you prefer to print the photo? I have done it on a, if you're using a computer or a tablet, it's an extremely good idea. You can usually set up a grid and you can say how many columns and how many lines, but you do need to make sure that they are actual squares. You can't just say 5 columns and five rows and 5 columns, because they might not be square. So if you have that facility, Heidi, you can use the squares on your computer. Most cameras have got the facility for 2 horizontal lines and 2 verticals, but that's not about gridding. That is about composition, and that's there for another lesson. Okay, so I did mention one of the pitfalls is drawing crooked. So try not to draw crooked, especially when you're doing your first grid, but also when you're drawing your grid on the paper. Another pitfall actually is that, yes, you do to a certain extent need to rub this out, but by the time you finish shading and all sorts of things, a lot of the time you can't see these lines anyway. Showing your marks on a portrait is quite acceptable. Many people, you will see many sketches where you can still see some of the grid lines under the painting. Quite another way to help you with the grid, and I used to do this when I was teaching kids, is we made a whole page of a grid. This was in a very small book, but we used a nice thick pen to make a grid that was the size of the page that they always drew on. Now obviously we're not going to draw a whole portrait, because on top of these permanent lines. But if you make them nice and thick like that, now I wonder what I've got on the other side. Now I'll have to tear out a piece of paper. Now what that helps you to do, if you would like, and you can do this if you've got a, I was going to say a light table, but now you probably can't see that. Oh yes, you can see very faint lines coming through, and if you do that, you can always use that as a permanent grid, and you can sketch your drawing in using these lines that are there without actually drawing on your final piece of paper. I am going to transfer the camera to my computer camera, because I think I've come to the end and I'd like to see you. Hello, that's a bit odd and a bit small because my computer camera is way down there. See me pointing my finger. How's that for foreshortening? Remember our foreshortening? So I'll peer down at you like this to say goodbye, and hopefully next week I will remember to charge my battery. Now, all of my videos are available on YouTube as well as Facebook. If you're going to go on YouTube, it'd be great if you subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's wonderful having so many of you on board. I hope you're enjoying my emails and all these videos. I look forward to seeing you on Tuesday if you're part of the Get Drawing group for some critique and for the challenge for the following week. Otherwise, I will see you all next Friday with my batteries all charged and all the lights working. Bye-bye for now, and get drawing!